forward this call so we
Thank
can
you.
share with those who haven't been able to join us today. So take it away, Ariana.
Yes, so good morning again to everybody. I'm so honored to introduce Dr. Yolandra Hancock. Dr. Hancock is a seasoned pediatrician and obesity specialist who combines her hands-on clinical experience and public health expertise with her passion for building vibrant families and communities. She provides patients with empowerment and best-in-class health and wellness care to families to achieve a healthier lifestyle. Her journey in providing quality healthcare youth brought her to Washington, D.C.'s Children's National Medical Center, where she served as one of the top doctors specializing in pediatrics. Later, she went on to become an assistant professor at the Milken Institute of Public Health at the George Washington University, which is very close to home to us. But currently, she's the founder of the Delta Health and Wellness Consulting, and Dr. Hancock continues to be a tireless advocate for public health reform, education, and tackling health disparities. She's appeared on national talk shows like CNN News and has led community health initiatives with community-based organizations like Green Screen and DC Greens, among many other activities. And today, Dr. Hancock will dive into resilience and her journey in the STEM field.
Thank you, Ariana. So appreciate you. Everyone in TechGirls has been absolutely amazing. Thank you guys, for some of you, for getting up super, super early to join in and just for showing up for yourselves. What I wanted to do today was sort of combine giving you sort of a story about my journey through my career, but also giving you a talk about resiliency. A lot of times folks will give a conversation about, this is what you need to do, these are the skill sets you need to have, this is how I navigate it through. But very rarely do we really share our authentic story, what our lived experience has been in going through this, because a lot of us make it look so glamorous and easy, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I strive to be her, but she makes it. No, I'm going to give you the real deal and let you know what this was like and how you, because you're already tapping in, like the fact that you're in this program, what I've already heard about you already demonstrates that you have resiliency in your DNA in the same way that I do. All right, so what I'm going to do is share my screen real quick. Pull this little bad boy up. I always get nervous with it, even though I do this every single Thursday. I still get nervous that Zoom is going to act up or I'm not going to be able to share my screen. So we're going to talk about resiliency, tapping into your inner strength. I'm very interactive in terms of talks, so I'm going to allow you to unmute. I'll ask questions because I like to have conversation as opposed to just simply giving a talk. So I want to hear from you. When you hear the word resiliency, what does it mean to you? Feel free to unmute yourselves and talk to me. How do you define resiliency?
Looks like Tama, you raised your hand. Feel free to unmute yourself.
So as a Palestinian, I think this word connects with me the most. I think being resilient means just standing out, being there, being vocal, and just really fighting for your right to be and for what you want in the face of the storms that might come your way.
I love it. I think that is a beautiful definition of resiliency. Who else?
I think resiliency is kind of like the quality that we have that gives us the strength to face the hardships that we face on a daily basis. And it's what makes us move forward and become the great people we want to be.
Absolutely. I think with that, we will transition to the next slide. You both hit the nail on the head, both in terms of using voice and your inner strength, but also how do you navigate through those challenging times where you do not allow your circumstances to define what your outcome is going to be. So I'm Dr. Yolandra Hancock. I'm a mommy. That's my most important job, is that of being my daughter's mother. I'm a pediatrician and obesity specialist, but I also have the joy of being not only a professor of public health, but I really try to wear a public health shero hat, right? You'll find me at Black Lives Matters rallies. Actually, on this coming Wednesday, I will be at a rally to compel the federal government to make sure that vaccine access happens globally, not just in terms of issuing out some vaccine, right? Because that's giving the man the fish, but allowing patents to be released so that other countries like India, who's being annihilated by COVID-19, that they have access and capacity to be able to create vaccine for their community instead of having to wait for a handout. And so that's how I not only use my public health expertise, but also how I serve as a community advocate. But that wasn't always the case. I'm originally from Louisiana. I moved out of Louisiana when I was just a little girl moving to California. My mom was in a domestic abuse situation. And around the time that I was 8 years old, she, my little brother, who was less than a year, and I hopped on a plane within 24 hours of her escaping my stepfather's home. And we were in California. The only reason why we did not end up homeless was because we had one family member in California, my Uncle Greg, who was in the military, and we moved in with him, his wife, and his daughter. And as you can likely imagine, for any of you who have ever had like your entire lives flipped upside down in like a 24-hour period of time, being close to 8 years old, I didn't really understand the dynamics. It was a very hard situation because I had witnessed my mom in the midst of this domestic abuse. I had been abused myself. And so it was all of those emotions happening all at once. And at the time, and luckily we're in a space and place where adults, parents, sometimes not always, have conversations with their children about the things that are happening in their lives. Because my mother was in full survival mode, there were no conversations. So I was sort of left to figure a lot of the stuff out on my own. And as you can imagine, being ripped from my grandmother's home, which is where I lived when I was a little girl, and being put in a space where the three of us were in a single room trying to navigate through a very stressful period of time, that's sort of what one of my first doses of resiliency and being able to find some inner strength. But even before that, I always say that my mother found resiliency even before I was conceived. She is the second youngest of 6 children. She lost her father when she was only 5 years old. And my grandmother, who, I always say resilience is in our DNA, because my grandmother was able to successfully raise 6 children on her own in a very small rural town in Louisiana. We actually, we didn't get sidewalks and street addresses until after Hurricane Katrina. So that gives you a sense of the rural space that I lived in when I was growing up. And then when my mom got pregnant with me at 14, my grandmother just didn't feel like she had the capacity to carry through and become a mommy at such a young age. My mother was actually taken to an abortion clinic, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I make no claims or stakes in terms of where I lie in terms of abortion rights, but I am simply grateful that my mother felt compelled to carry through the pregnancy, and here I am. And so I think about those stories, not in terms of, oh my gosh, our lives were so challenging and so difficult, but the fact that my grandmother committed to raising all 6 of her children in the face of losing her husband and did such a phenomenal job. The fact that my mother committed to having me despite being 14 when she got pregnant. My father was 21 at the time. And as some of you likely know, with such a significant age difference here in the United States, he could have easily been accused of statutory rape. Because of that, his mother sent him off to live somewhere else. And I did not meet my father until I was 2 years old. I did not grow up with him in my life. And, because of a lot of those circumstances, I grew up what I call resource challenged. I never considered myself to be poor. My mother did not raise me with this notion that we were poor. I didn't know we didn't have any money till it was time to apply to college, and we didn't have money to provide for the application fees. That's when I learned. I was like, wait, we don't have money? When did that happen? Because my mother, in her just amazing ability to be resilient, she always found a way out of no way, right? And I'm the oldest in my family, both on my mother and my father's side. My mommy has 2 kids, me and my little brother, Leviticus. And any of you who are familiar with the Bible, yes, his name is the third book of the Bible. And then on my father's side, I'm the oldest of 5 children. But I tell you all of this not to be like, oh my gosh, Dr. Hancock's life was so challenging. A lot of times people assume that me becoming a physician means that I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth and that things just went phenomenally well and easy for me. And that wasn't the case. But because of my background and what I experienced, and not just survived through, but I consider it thriving through, it allowed me to develop the muscle that I needed to pursue the career that I did, right? So being able to look back and see the resiliency of my grandmother and women even before her. I could tell you stories about my great grandmother in Louisiana, the fact that my ancestors survived slavery in Louisiana and were able to come together, heal through all of that, that my mom can remember segregation and white only signs in Louisiana. The hospital where I was born did not desegregate until the year before I was born. I was born in 1973. The civil rights, all of that was happening in the 50s and 60s. But the hospital where I was born, which is highlighted in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, there's a sign from the hospital where I was born that shows that not until 1972 were African American women able to freely receive care and deliver at that hospital. Prior to 73, there were certain days of the week where Black women were allowed to come in and have their babies. And as you guys know, babies come when they want to, right? You can't schedule it unless it's a C-section, and that certainly wasn't happening back in the 70s. So being able to see their examples every single time there was a crossroads with a hurdle in it, I was able to reflect back on what my mother was able to survive and thrive through, what my grandmother was able to survive and thrive through. And then as my life experiences played out, being able to see those examples within my own life, right? And there are a lot of, we have a choice in our lives when things happen. We can either see it as a burden, a struggle, and it be the thing that discourages us from pursuing that next level gain, or we can see it as an example of what we were able to survive and thrive through and use it as a muscle to build our confidence, our determination, and the fulfillment of the passion that has been placed on you by your higher being, right? And that's what's been able to allow me to navigate through these spaces. And it reminds me of a quote by Joel Osteen, who's an evangelist out here in the United States. He says, "You're not defined by your past, you're prepared by it. You're stronger, more experienced, and you have greater confidence." And what I would tell you guys to do, and I'll show you some of the examples that I use, I find quotes, songs. So my faith is Christianity. My grandmother, who's old school Baptist, gives me all these scriptures, right? But there are also stories and quotes that Allah provides, that the Quran provides. In Buddhism, one of my students is from Tibet. She was actually the first student at George Washington University to come from Tibet on scholarship, and she graduated last year. So she gave me this book from the Dalai Lama. I pull those quotes out as well. It's amazing to me as you go through life experiences, these things just show up. And it just so happened I was going through some challenges, and one of my students served as a motivator for me. She gave me this book with just short one-liners from the Dalai Lama, and I pull things out and put them in my phone, put them on a Post-it to have around my office. So those are the things that I use to encourage me. So this is the 6 domains of resiliency. I'm going to move your beautiful faces over so that you can see it in its full capacity. I use this not just in terms of my own life, but in how I connect with my patients. So as you guys know, I'm a physician and I'm also a public health person. I incorporate public health in everything that I do. And what that means is looking at all of the social determinants of health. That's a phrase that we use in public health that defines the factors that influence our health outcomes. So social determinants of health, which we'll talk about in a little bit, define 80% of someone's health outcome, right? How well they live, their personal health, their community health, all of those are tied into these social determinants of health. 20% of a person's health outcome is based on seeing a doctor like me. So it's my responsibility, and hopefully the responsibility of every healthcare provider, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, and physician to incorporate public health in what we do so that we can affect the full 100% of a person. Those social determinants of health include where a person is born, where they grow, where they learn, where they play, where they pray, where they work, and where they age, right? All of those influence our health decisions in terms of where we eat, where we engage in physical activity, if we can engage in physical activity, what our mental health is going to look like, what our emotional health is going to look like, what our relational health is going to look like. And so it's important for us to understand the social determinants within ourselves. What environment are we in that allows us to reach our optimal physical health, spiritual health, financial health, all of those components of health? And then how do we tap into our own resiliency to be able to optimize each of those areas? So the first is vision. You guys already have that down, right? You are showing up for yourselves by being in TechGirls. You are showing up for yourselves by, no matter what circumstances you have been dealing with, to still pursue a higher education from high school all the way through to graduate school, right? You've identified your purpose, you've established goals, and you've made sure that the decisions that you are making, and not all the time, like if we're really honest with ourselves, sometimes the decisions that we make are not they are incongruent with our life goals, right? There's some relationships that we've gotten into, whether it be friendship or romantic. There's some jobs that we've agreed to that were not in alignment. But my belief is that the universe, our higher power, whoever, allows us to make these decisions, because no matter what misstep you thought it was, there's still some learning in it, and it still will redirect you to your ultimate purpose. I can tell you that when I was in college, I could not afford to apply to medical school straight out. So I ended up teaching elementary school for a couple of years after graduating from UCLA. I taught out in Watts in Los Angeles. So for my Cali crew, you know where that is. And was it my plan to become an elementary school teacher? Absolutely not. I've always been a teacher. I used to teach Sunday school when I was in middle and high school. And so it sort of made sense to teach. I love it. I still do it now at GW. I swear I will always be a teacher in some capacity. But my vision, my purpose, my goal was to go from college to medical school straight out. And was I heartbroken that I didn't have the money to do it? Absolutely. Did I let it discourage me? No. And so it just so happened, I was looking at different jobs. I was going to work in a lab and do research with HIV. And one of my best friends, her mother said, I need teachers, and I think you'd be excellent. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do it. So I taught a split class. It was half Spanish speaking, half what we used to call English only, which I find to be offensive. But I integrated it. It was all languages. We did English and we learned Spanish. Everybody learned everything. And when I tell you it made such sense after the fact, like in the middle of it, I was still working through my emotions. I was still, as we say, in my feelings, because I had my friends were going to medical school. They were doing all these big things. And I felt like all I did was just taught elementary school. But the change that I was able to affect in my students' lives was the reason why I was there, number one. The other reason why I feel like I was placed in that space was because it made me such a better pediatrician. My hat is off to every single teacher, elementary through high school, because it is a thankless job. But I got such a better understanding of children's health, right? I understood the impact of poverty in terms of children's ability to learn. I understood the challenges of food insecurity in terms of children's ability to learn. And so when I finally became a pediatrician got into medical school 2.5 years later, I had a better vision of how I was going to practice medicine. And that's when I started to have a vision for what public health was and how important public health was in terms of children's health and family and community health. And even when I applied to medical school, I applied only to the California schools because I was that cocky about getting into medical school. The only school outside of California schools was Howard University. And so when I applied, I just knew I was getting in, like no doubt, like my grades were good, MCAT scores were pretty decent. And I'm me, right? I'm thebomb.com. And then I got waitlisted at 3 schools, inclusive of my alma mater, UCLA. June passed, no movement on the wait list. July passed, no movement on the wait list. And I'm very anal retentive type A. So I had plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and K. I applied to schools of public health. I got into Harvard. I also applied to post-bac programs. And I went to my pre-med advisor and I said, well, what should I do? And she said, and this is a part of the advice is getting you a good advisor, right? She said, I would do the post-bac program. Your science grades are good, but they're not going to be what guarantees you a spot in medical school. And I was like, what? Whatever, I'm going to Harvard. But I was in a relationship. I had a boo. I was not yet ready to leave California and leave my boo. And so I was like, well, she's told me to do this post-bac program. I don't want to leave my boo, so I'm going to stay down here. I went to San Diego and did a post-bac program at UCSD. The reason for that post-bac program was to reestablish relationship with my mother. And again, it's all in how you see what's happening, right? When I got ready to graduate from high school, my mother, our relationship was pretty strained for a lot of reasons. And so I didn't get a lot of time to spend with her before I went off to college. And even though I was only 2 hours away, we still didn't get to spend as much time together as we could have when I was in high school. And when I got into that post-bac program, I ended up having to move back in with my mom. And was I embarrassed? Absolutely. Did I have to put all my stuff in storage? Yeah. But it made sense because we had such good quality time together that we were able to reestablish relationship. And I would not give that up for anything. Even if someone had said, you either get to go to medical school right now or spend the 6 weeks with your mother, what are you going to do? And now that I know what happened and what transpired, I would have postponed medical school all over again. And so a week before taking the MCAT and 1 day before UCLA started their med school, I got a phone call on a Friday, a couple of days before my birthday. And they said, if you are still available, we would like to admit you into the class of 2002. 1 day before med school started. You talk about jumping for joy, shouting hallelujah, doing a praise dance. I got a call on a Friday. I was in med school that Monday. Didn't have to retake the MCAT. I showed up, red dress, blazer. You would have thought I was going to like a speaking engagement, right? I was suited and booted, as we say, ready and eager to go. But had I not gotten into medical school at that point, I had already accepted the fact that my goal now was to get through this post-bac program, perform my best to set myself up for success because I was fully committed to becoming a physician. What that did for me and having sort of that last minute admission was it just fueled me even more to become the best physician I could be. And so what I channel into was composure, right? I didn't wallow in self-pity. I gave myself a day or so to experience the grief of being on a wait list. But then what I did was I paid attention to what I needed to do. And I was calm, I was in control. And when I would have those moments where I felt down about myself, where I questioned my ability, I tapped into my circles. So that even if I couldn't motivate myself, there were other people around me to be able to do it, right? And when it comes to resiliency, it's about reasoning through things. It's problem solving. I problem solve. If you're not getting into medical school, what else are you going to do? What resources can you tap into? I didn't know anything about post-bac programs because that wasn't my plan, but I started making some phone calls. I didn't wait for people to help me. I sought out the help that I needed. I was able to anticipate and plan so that I had strategies in place for whatever the outcome was going to be. But in the midst of all that, I maintained good health. So one of my areas, clearly as an obesity specialist, is focusing on physical health. So making sure that I got enough sleep, making sure that I focused on exercise, being in that position and then being in medical school and residency, and even as a practicing physician, is a very stressful space, right? You guys know, you experience the stress in navigating through what you're going through. You have to have healthy avenues in which to take care of you. You have to make sure that you're eating the way that you know you're supposed to, right? I can tell you when I was your age in my early 20s and teens, I wasn't eating my best, right? It wasn't until I was in my late 20s in medical school that I really recognized the need for me to commit to good physical health. And even now, I'll be fully transparent, sleep is my Achilles heel. On average, I get between 4 to 6 hours, more 4 than 6, but I'm a work in progress too, right? I wanna make sure you guys know I'm not over here projecting perfection. I certainly am not. But then there's the tenacity. I already get the vibe from you guys that you are a tenacious group of women. You are persistent, you remain optimistic, and you get your bounce back on. Like I don't know if you guys have them, but there are these balls that I used to play with. My grandmother would buy them for me, these bouncy balls. And when you bounce it, it just goes all over the place, right? Boom, 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 boom. That's what we do. We bounce back. Like the ball just does not, it stops and you might rest for a minute, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you bounce back. You are able to rebound despite the circumstances that you experience. And then part of it is what you've already done, creating those support networks like TechGirls, having those appropriate perceptions of what is happening in your world and how you will be able to maneuver through. And if you can't see your way through it, being able to connect within your networks to help you connect to people who can help you navigate through those challenging spaces, all right? So what made the difference for me? Staying focused on my goal. I decided when I was 7 years old that I was going to become a doctor. I watched my great-grandfather, my papa, suffer in an emergency room as we were waiting for the one doctor who worked at the hospital where I was born. And because he had to wait, he suffered additional medical complications. But I remember saying to him, Papa, I'm going to become a doctor so no one ever has to wait to see a doctor again. I don't want you to get sick anymore. But I also allowed myself time and space to feel. When I could not afford to apply to medical school, I grieved a little bit. People say, oh, it's okay, you'll be all right. Give me my space, right? Let me feel the way I feel. I'm not going to wallow in self-pity, but I allow myself some time to heal. And right now, what I do is I give myself a certain amount of time. And then I tap into my accountability partners. I'm like, if I'm still in my feelings by tomorrow, I need you to call me and be like, girl, come on. You know, you've survived and thrived through much worse than this. Let's go. And then I'm like, you're right, high five, let's go. I pull out my little quotes, my inspirational music, all those good things to get me right. And I do Reiki. So I'm a Reiki healer, and I will Reiki myself if I need to when I'm in my feelings. But I also communicate how I feel. I don't hold it in. You can tell I like to talk. I don't swallow things down because I'm a big believer when you swallow your emotions down, it manifests itself physically, right? It will manifest in high blood pressure. It will manifest itself in stomach aches. It will manifest itself in headaches. So if you're finding yourself in the midst of circumstances, feeling physically ill, recognize what it is that you're swallowing down and not releasing, and connect with people or journaling, dance it out, whatever the thing is that you need to do to seek out those additional supports. And for me, it's important, whatever your spiritual background is, for me, it's important for me to stay spiritually connected, because I believe that my higher power allows me to facilitate and navigate myself through some very challenging circumstances. And if it had not been for my faith, I would not have been able to do some of the things that we just described. But what I want to make sure you know is that resiliency is not superwoman syndrome, right? It isn't putting your cape on and no matter what, I'm gonna survive and thrive through, without allowing yourself to rest, without allowing yourself to acknowledge that you may feel sad, you may feel disappointed, you may feel discouraged, right? It's okay to feel those things. It's also okay to protect yourself. Resiliency does not mean that you overextend yourself. For a lot of you, especially as women in your families, you are likely, especially if you're the first person in your family to go to college, to have success academically, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders. I'm a first gen myself, and I know what your own internal expectation is of yourself. You're going to be the game changer, the transformational agent that brings your family out of poverty, that takes your family to the next level. You may be the translator for your family, either specifically in terms of language or in terms of navigating through all of these various spaces. It's a whole lot of responsibility to be the one. It's a burden that I know I've carried as being the oldest and the one to help navigate through. There are all these expectations that I put on myself for my family, where when I talked to my mom, she was like, who told you we had to do that? I was like, I just assumed I did. She's like, no. And so you have to be comfortable and purposeful in protecting yourself. I always say, no is a verb. No is a full sentence. It's okay to say no to some things, because as you continue to find success, more people are going to want to attach to you. More people are going to ask of you. and you can overextend yourself because you will feel compelled to do it. Because you found some success, you will feel obligated to be the one that's over here helping this one, starting this, doing this, coaching this one, advising this one. You will exhaust yourself, right? Like they say on the airplane, you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you assist everyone else, right? You cannot pour from an empty vessel. You have to be full first, and then everybody else receives the overflow. Self-care is not selfish. I write that on a Post-it, put it in front on your phone, remind yourself of it every time you feel guilty because you know you don't have the time to do X, Y, or Z. And there will be people who will try to make you feel guilty about doing it. Well, see, this is what happens. You get yours and you don't want to help anybody else. No, I'm just trying not to kill myself. I don't want to overcommit. And this is the way that you do it diplomatically. I always say, my love, I don't want to overcommit and underdeliver. And so with knowing that right now, I wouldn't be able to give my full self to this project, to this talk, to this coaching opportunity, to advising you through. I don't want to disappoint. And I know that I would do that if I agreed to doing this right now. Circle back with me in a couple of months, I might be able to do it, but I just don't have the capacity to fully follow through right now. And it's an honest answer. And who can argue that, right? And anyone who does shows you that they don't value you and your health and your wholeness. And they've just revealed who they are and their lack of consideration for you, all right? And it's important to understand that now. I wish someone had told me that when I was your age, because I always felt like I had to be the rescue for every single person. And it's something I even struggle with now. I will tell you, me taking my cape off is hard. It's so hard because as a doctor, I want to help everybody, right? My phone gets blown up every single day, especially in the midst of a pandemic. Everyone who's getting a vaccine wants to know, should I get it? Which one should I get? What should I do after I get the vaccine? My arm is swollen. What do I do now? I literally, between my IG, Facebook, and my cell phone, I get at least 10 to 15 messages from my non-patients every single day. And I feel compelled to respond. So now I have a set of staged responses. I just copy, cut, paste, send, because it allows me to still engage and be helpful because people see me as a resource without overextending myself. And I also do like a Facebook Live every Wednesday, and I do separate videos. And then I'll just copy the link and share it. Because most times I've already created a video to answer the questions that are asked. So there are all kinds of tricks to still be available without overextending yourself, all right? So what I want to do now is have an opportunity. I want to hear, you've heard my story of resiliency. I want to be able to hear your stories of resiliency. I'm going to stop the share for a second because I want to be able to hear from you guys. So I want to just hear, give me, like, talk to me about your example of resiliency. I want to hear from you because this is where I get my energy and my joy.
I see Tama and Sura have their hands raised. So I saw Tama, so go ahead, Tama, and then Sura.
If I can just like ask you a question and then I can go back to the resiliency stories. You mentioned so the main question is, how do you balance your relationships, whether it's like with your family or with your partner and with your opportunities and goals? You had a small example of how you got into Harvard, but then you had a boyfriend at the time. So I didn't understand what happened next, but I think you didn't go to Harvard. In our cases, I think it's like going to whole another country, like meeting or like going to a master's degree, which is like too long for a long distance relationship. Can you elaborate on this more, please?
You're muted, Dr. Hancock.
I think that's an excellent question. I'll answer both. So the first is, how do I balance the relationships, work-life balance, right? So what I will tell you is there's no such thing as work-life balance. There will be people who will say that. What I say is it's a pendulum swing, right? There are times where if I have a grant proposal due, if I have like a book chapter that I have to prepare, the majority of my time is going to be spent getting that grant proposal done. But what I do is communicate. I will talk to my daughter as young as she is, and I will let her know. Her nickname is Little Mommy, Mamasa, and Bunny. So if you hear me use any of those three, or Stink, because she's my stinker. So if you hear any of those, it's the same person. So I'll say, Mamasa, Mommy has a grant proposal due next week. What that means is we're going to have quality time, not quantity time, right? And I'll be very specific in how I schedule that time with her. So as an example, Friday afternoons are, as a standard, the time I spend with my daughter. No appointments, no talks, no meetings, just her. But occasionally there is an exception to the rule where if a grant proposal is due on Friday, we're doing this grant proposal so I can get this money. And I will communicate that to her. I won't wait till Friday and be like, oh, I'm sorry, Mommy can't hang with you today. The same thing, like throughout the week when she has been in virtual school, I usually am her playmate for recess and lunchtime play. But if there's something comes up, a patient can only be seen at 11:30, I will let her know, Mommy can't play today, or whenever the patient is scheduled the appointment, so she can anticipate. And then I try to figure out what else we can do. In terms of personal relationships, I'll be fully transparent with you. In my marriage, I was horrible at the pendulum swing, right? I was so focused on getting my master's in public health, because I got my MPH after I finished medical school. I went to Hopkins and got my MPH back in the early 2000s. And I'm very type A. I wanted Delta, Omega, honor status, the whole nine. A's were the only grade I wanted. And so I had to really work through, and I had to apologize to my now ex-husband, but we didn't split for that reason. But at the time I had to apologize. I acknowledged, I know I neglected my time with you. I will be more purposeful. And I was. We had specific date nights, like you have to put forth the energy. In terms of my relationship that I chose over going to Harvard for my MPH, one, I wasn't ready to leave California. Two, I wasn't ready to leave the relationship. I knew that if I went to Harvard to get my MPH, our relationship was done. I had invested 6 years in this relationship. Yeah. And so I was like, nah, because I'm thinking this is the one, right? He ended up not being, he was so not the one. And that wasn't revealed until I went to medical school. Because my time was so demanding in medical school, he didn't deal with it well. And we broke up in medical school. And I'm so glad that we did, because in residency, we really would have gone all the way like deep south, because in residency, my time was even more limited than in medical school. And, had I gone to Harvard to get my MPH, in hindsight, it would have likely just facilitated the end of what needed to happen anyway. But, I don't live with regrets, because I know that the time that I was able to spend with my mother was what made that post-bac choice the choice for me. But it really is being purposeful. Like, I'm in a relationship now. My significant other lives 2 hours away in Philadelphia. And so we are very purposeful in talking on a regular basis. I was very upfront in what my expectations were with a long distance relationship in terms of how I wanted communication to happen. He's an artist, he's a musician. His schedule is actually more demanding than mine. He owns his own record label, so things are a little bit crazy, but I went into it knowing that, and he was very transparent with me in terms of his availability. So we communicated very, very well. Communication is going to be critical. If you're in a relationship that you think will sustain significant long distance, where you come to Hopkins, leaving your country of origin to pursue this master's or this medical doctorate, if the person is someone you trust and that remains committed to you and can navigate through, I've had students and colleagues who've been able to successfully navigate through a significant long distance and still allowed it to work out. But you have to be very purposeful. Again, it goes back to balance, right? And communication. If you do not have consideration, communication, and commitment to doing what you've set forth to do and maintaining the relationship, whether it be romantic, friend, parenting, like on either side, right? Because your parents, as you go through these things, depending on what your role in relationship is with your parents, it can be very hard. If your parents rely on you heavily and you go out of country to do something, you're going to have guilt. You're going to want to go back home. It's going to be hard to focus. You have to have clear expectations. And listen, guys, I love you. I know I've been your rock, but this is what this is going to look like. Talk to people, connect with people who have been in your position so that they can come in. Like, sometimes you got to phone a friend. We're going to have a little family meeting on Zoom so we can talk through what this is going to look like. And they're still going to go back to you because you are their rock. You have to have that intestinal fortitude to be able to know what you've committed to, because it's just 2 years. It's just 4 years, right? Maybe even 7 if you do residency out here. But the end game, the end result is going to bless them and benefit them in so many amazing ways. You will transform your family for generations to come. They may not have that vision, but you have to continue to remind yourself, no matter how much paternal, maternal, sibling guilt gets placed on you, you continue to maintain your focus, because you know in the end, this is going to bless everybody, as long as you are able to swing that pendulum in those directions. And when you go back home, right? When you go on spring break, when you go on holiday or whatever, stay committed to spending that time with your family. You want to go out and hang out with your friends and go to the beach and all these things, and your family's gonna be like, wait a minute, you said when you came back home, it would be us. Or your boo will say, you said it was going to be us. What do you mean you're going to Hawaii with your med school friends? Because it will happen. And instead you're like, babe, just meet us out there. You have to make sure you follow through on your commitment. Otherwise, when you get ready to go back to school, when you get ready to pursue your career, they're going to look at you with their eyebrow raised. I remember what you said last time, and it becomes difficult. So that would be my advice in navigating through those relational spaces. For me, that was probably one of the most challenging parts of it, was being an oldest child, being the one who sort of broke the poverty cycle, and like having a little bit of money in my pocket, and then somebody's money was funny. And they'd be like, oh, well, we know you're doing well, and feeling guilty and like, okay, I'm gonna give you some. And then when it was time to pay tuition, I'm over here short, figuring out how I'm gonna buy books because I'm trying to save everybody else. Oxygen mask on you first. All right, now I wanna hear from you guys.
Sarah, go on ahead. I see your hand raised.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your talk, the presentation. Everything was very inspiring. So maybe the word I learned what the word resilience really mean when I had to leave university last year. I was a scholarship student at the American University of Beirut, majoring in biology as a female student. And I'm the oldest. I'm Jordanian, so I was an international student at the university. And I actually was the first female who wanted to be a doctor in the extended family. So actually that was a bit stressful. My parents were always supportive, but I always had expectations. So maybe that puts more pressure on me, that I had to succeed, I had to maintain grades, and especially that I was a scholarship student that was sponsored by the US Department of State. So it was a bit hard. And the AUB is in Lebanon. And unfortunately, with the recent circumstances, the scholarship told me that I will not be able to go back to attend my biology labs. And I will have to take a gap year. And because of the economy, the med school tuition was not covered in my scholarship, and the tuition tripled. So I knew that I will not be able to afford a med school tuition anymore. And because they told me that I have to change my major to psychology pre-med, and I believe that I don't want that. And I felt that I'm going towards the unknown in this pre-medical track, not because there's something wrong with it, but because in Jordan, it's a 6-year medical program. And I don't have any citizenship. So if I graduated from a pre-medical program, AUB will be my only option. And I cannot afford the tuition of AUB med school anymore. So I had to go back to Jordan and to leave the university and to leave the scholarship. And it was really hard to me because in some point I had to reimburse them everything because it was a commitment. And I didn't actually want to leave the scholarship because at some point I felt guilty that I took someone else's place in this scholarship and I have to leave now. So it's in October, I left the university, and now I have to take a gap year. But according to the Jordanian rules, I cannot apply to med schools if I, as a graduate entry, I have to be a high school graduate directly. So I had to be re-enrolled in a high school again and to take these school exams again. But here comes another problem, that I was a scholarship student at high school. And because of COVID and everything that is going on, my parents were not able to afford my high school tuition again. So I went back to my high school and I submitted a proposal and my grades, and they actually agreed to enroll me back on a full scholarship again. So I'm currently a 12th grader, repeating my exams. I sat for my first exam 3 days ago, and my official exam starts on May 4th. And I'm really hoping to do well in these exams and to be able to apply to med schools in Jordan. It was a bit hard for me because there was the uncertainty that the exams might be cancelled because of COVID, because they are international exams and it's the British patterned educational system. So I was so scared that I left the university and now there are no exams. So I will be left without a degree, and I'm the oldest, and I have, as you said, to break this chain and to go to university. But thank you so much. Your talk was very inspiring to us because as women and as females, and the medical field is a very, very long journey. So I wanted to ask you, in your own opinion, how can we fight the burnout or the onset burnout? Personally, I try to always be motivated, but I'm really scared that at some point along the way, I will be burnt out because it's a very long journey.
No, absolutely. One, I just want to just applaud you and your story of resiliency and tenacity, and being not just willing to navigate through, but like being persistent in how you are navigating through this space, because there are a good number of people who would have been like, I got to repeat, what? I'm good. I'm going to do something else. The fact that you remain encouraged and ask such a great question, I think just reflects how amazing you are. I think part of it is really having a clear vision of why you're doing what you're doing, right? So making sure that as you go through this, you keep your eyes, we say, on the prize. What is committing you, compelling you to pursue this career in medicine? Every single time I questioned what I was doing, there would be some sort of universal reminder, right? So I started out because my papa didn't have access to a doctor. When I was in my sophomore year of college, I was thinking about becoming a plastic surgeon to travel the world doing craniofacial repairs for children who were born with birth defects. And then my cousin, who was like my sister, died a month after her 4th birthday because of lack of access to care. And I just kept being reminded of why I was doing it. When I was in my pre-med classes, experiencing burnout, because they design these classes to boot you out. They design classes to weed you out. They tell you that the first day of class, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you will finish this program out at the end of your 4 or 5 years. And so I'm looking like, sucks to be you, right? But in the midst of all of that, I have dealt with racism. I have dealt with sexism. I have dealt with sexual harassment. I was actually a psychobiology major at UCLA. I didn't start out that way. I didn't want that. I was a physiological sciences major, but my professor hit on me. And then when I did not accept his advances, he failed me on one of my exams. And when I challenged the test, he was all kinds of racist comments came out of his mouth, and he was going to be another professor of mine because the department was so small. And the only department that I could switch to where my classes would count was psychobiology, which would allow me to still graduate on time. And at the time, it made no sense. But now it does, because so much of the work that I do is mind-body connected, that when I can reflect back on my psychobiology background, I'm like, this, like as much as it was horrible to be harassed and to experience racism and sexism, there was still positive that came out of it. And so what I would say to you, my love, is in the journey that you're going through, I always say that the universe puts obstacles in front of those of us who have the best potential. Like there's so much that you are about to do with the work that's been placed in your heart, that there are all these barriers to just continue to try to deflect you, but we're not going to allow that to happen. You know, I'm a spiritual person, so I will definitely keep you in my prayers in terms of opportunities just opening up, windows, doors, a crack, whatever. needs to happen, because this is a test to see how badly you want it. That's what I always see it as. And no matter what, I stay focused on what I need to do. It's important. Self-care is what's going to help in terms of addressing burnout. When I was in residency, I lost a patient. I tried to advocate my best for him, a 2-year-old little boy, and the attending doctors didn't listen to me. He ended up dying because what I recommended for him to get, they did not give him. And then I was accused of not doing it. They just assumed I wasn't going to fight back, and I'm a fighter, so I did. But because that little boy died, I felt guilty. I felt like I should have fought harder. I should have risked my position in residency. He would still be alive. And I get emotional now even thinking about it. But what it did was it fueled me to be a staunch advocate for my patients. So no matter if I risked my position in residency, if I risked my job, I've come close to getting fired advocating for my patients and staying committed to why I became a physician in the first place. So there are going to be these moments throughout your careers that are going to attempt to discourage you from what you know you were created on this planet to do. You remind yourself of what you've survived and thrived through. You keep an eye on why you committed to doing what you did. And then you connect to yourself, your higher power, and your community to get refueled and recommitted. Because sometimes you'll forget why you decided to do what you just, you're like, why am I doing this? I have tried 50 billion different ways to become a doctor. Clearly the universe has spoken and this is not supposed to be what I do. But I'm a strong believer that these obstacles are put in your place to really strengthen who you are and your resiliency, not just for you, Surah, but for the girls who come behind you. They're going to hear your story of resiliency, and whatever they're going through, they're going to say to themselves, if she was able to get through all of that, and she still has MD, DO, whatever behind her name, she's Dr. Surah, I know I can do it too. That's part of the reason why I went through everything that I did, so I could sit before you today and tell you that despite having no money, despite being waitlisted, there were times when I was in medical school, I didn't know how I was going to pay my tuition. And I'd be like, all right, God, what are we doing? You know, tuition's due next week. I'm just waiting to see you open up some doors. And then my Uncle Greg would send me a check out of the blue. I had too much pride to communicate to my connections to my community that I was broke as the 10 commandments, but somehow they would know to come. I was eating like tuna sandwiches with just a smear of tuna because I didn't have money for food, but then I'd get a box from my grandmother of food, right? Like it would happen, it would manifest itself. So you remain faithful, you focus on whoever you're, like make there be a way, like go, if you are Muslim, go to the Quran, find those scriptures in the Quran, the word in the Quran that speaks to what will be manifested. You believe, let that word marinate. If you're biblical, the same thing. If you're Buddhist, same thing. You start thinking through to allow yourself to stay connected so that no matter what your physical eyes see, the spiritual eye, that higher power eye, allows you to see above and beyond your circumstances. Start envisioning what you will look like as a physician. Imagine yourself with your white coat on. Imagine clinically what that's going to look like, the books you're going to write, the stories you will tell. That's what's going to allow you to power through these circumstances. And then connecting to folks, because you just never know who knows who, even in Jordan, even in Lebanon. No matter where you are, there are likely going to be opportunities, even if you have to be a foreign medical grad here in the US. Whatever the thing is that we collectively need to do is now your village. This is what we do. And we help you because in those moments where you feel like you can't go on, you tap into us so that we can provide you with the encouragement, the fuel, the joy, the whatever you need to move forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock. I know I'm so inspired already with everything we went over with the domains of resilience and everything, but I do want to be mindful of your